that. And I should make the important point. It's not black or white. It's not like banks or Bitcoin. You actually have Bitcoin banks. They already exist. NYDIG and all these other guys, they're just taking custody of Bitcoin now, giving you traditional banking services, but on a Bitcoin standard. The other aspect is you don't have one pot of Bitcoin. You can put a little with this bank, that bank, this bank. You can spread out your counterparty risk, keep some in self-custody. I mentioned multi-signature earlier. That might be a little bit beyond the scope of this conversation, but you can actually get redundancy plus self-sovereignty. So you could trust yourself, but not make your house a target by using a multi-signature setup, which I think is the most useful schema for custodying your Bitcoin, because you get, again, redundancy. You don't have single point of failure, but you also don't have counterparty risk. And
that's going out to like my friends or my family and saying, hey, you 5 or 6 people, you also have to sign for this to be moved. And one of you hopefully goes, did Tom really want this? Right? That's what multi-sig is?
Correct. Yeah. You're selecting your circle of trust, basically, and structuring it in a way that a majority would not collude against you, right?
And that they don't probably even know who each other are.
Exactly. And there's a whole lot of game theoretic considerations to that, but it can be done, is the point. And Bitcoin enables this. You can't do that with any other asset. So that's radically new. To your point about Breedlove, shut the fuck up. You're not the only one to say that, actually. People have a bit of reticence about maybe discussing the geopolitical implications of Bitcoin. But the way that I look at it is that these conversations are going to be had. It's just a matter of, are they being had behind closed doors, favoring those in the room, or are these conversations we're going to have out in the open, such that it does not produce such an asymmetric outcome? So maybe I'm wrong. I could be persuaded one way or the other. And I've had a lot of smart people give me really good criticism about it. But it seems to me that in the digital age, in the ethos of openness and transparency, that we discuss what we've done here. What world have we created for ourselves? How does this radical new asset, a form of property, change the game? And what are the geopolitical implications? What does this do in the broader span of human history to the institutions we've come to depend on? I think it's a fruitful conversation to be had out in the sunlight. I do think, though, that it could be, we're very maybe indoctrinated to some extent that transitions have to be bloody, they have to be violent, and what have you. But again, a lot of this is rooted in the violability of property. Again, the book The Sovereign Individual goes into the logic of violence and how this has changed human behavior and human institutions over time. One simple example here would be the knight on horseback used to be the dominant force in the land because this guy could afford a war horse, afford a suit of armor and a lance. The stirrup actually was very pivotal innovation, because before the stirrup, the armored knight was too heavy to get on horseback. So he didn't have mobility to be the force in the land. So the stirrup, the seemingly simple invention, changed the logic of violence that allowed the knight to become dominant. That shit
is so fascinating. Yeah. Things like that. And how, what a big knock-on effect they have.
Yes.
Utterly fascinating.
So then this, had implications on the feudal age and the knight, the moral code of chivalry. All these things emerged from this kind of simple innovation that made the knight the dominant force. But then what happened? We invented gunpowder. So one knight that could take on 50 peasants in armed combat, all of a sudden, one peasant at 200 yards can take out a knight. So it all changes again, right? Chivalry collapses, all these things. So when we change the logic of violence, which means, the economic returns of violence or coercion or the cost of defense, the way we organize ourselves changes. And so you could think of Bitcoin as this new technology that so radically increases the cost to benefit ratio of violence. And that if someone's properly custodied it, again, in a multi-signature format or whatever, there's not any carrot at the end of robbing them. You're not going to get anything, right? You can go and in Bitcoin circles, they call this the $5 wrench attack, because you buy the wrench for $5 and you beat the guy over the head with a wrench until he gives up his Bitcoin. But if he's custodied it properly, there's no incentive even to conduct a $5 wrench attack. So in this gigantic geopolitical upheaval that I anticipate occurring due to the monetization of Bitcoin, I think it could be very uncertain at first. Governments are going to use their power in certain ways that could be unfavorable, let's say. But over time, as Bitcoin continues to monetize and more people are holding their wealth in this inviolable property, I would tend to believe that the incentives towards peaceful cooperation would begin to outweigh the incentives to coercion. So although it could be a bit rocky in the beginning, I think the long-term outcome is way more fruitful for humans. Something you said earlier too, that maybe people don't want sovereignty.
Full sovereignty.
I think incentives are the fertile soil from which our humanity springs, actually. All right. So we think, is maybe a bit egotistical, that we think that however we are, this is the way humans are, and it's the way they've always been. But again, that's totally not true, right? Pre-printing press, most of us were illiterate. We didn't have, our cognitive software was completely unrecognizable to what we are today. No one could sit here and have a conversation like this, much less with all these amazing tools we've created in the marketplace since then. So I think that by changing the fundamental soil, which are the incentives, again, like the logic of violence and all these other things, that we actually change our character traits and behaviors. I've said that, and to try and draw commonality here, I said organizations and institutions are all property strategies. I think that even DNA itself is kind of a survival strategy or property strategy over time, right?
That's
We're all organisms geared towards reproduction. Reproduction necessitates territory. We need to take territory. Humans express territory in property, right? That's how we share and build, declare property and create more wealth, actually, by trading through property rights. So I think that our strategies ultimately conform to the invariants on the game board, if you will. And Saylor talks about one of these as gravity, right? Like gravity is the one invariant that all of these strategies, whether you're a human being, whether you're a building, whether you're a government, like you're adapting your strategy to gravity. It's an invariant, right? If you changed gravity, it would destroy all the humans and buildings and all the things. You can kind of consider Bitcoin, maybe I'm out on a limb here, but I think 21 million, this fixed supply asset, as the emergence of a new, seemingly perfected invariant in the market for money. So it forces all of us to change our strategies to adopt this invariant in the space. So this is at the individual level, the institutional level, and at the nation state level. Sounds a bit radical, but I think that if you come to see, DNA as a survival strategy propagating through blood, flesh, and bone, and that all the other creations we make are just, in biology, they call this the extended phenotype. We have the genotype, which is the genetic code, the strategy itself. We implement it in the phenotype, the body, the teeth, the eyes. We have the extended phenotype, which are our tools and technologies, or even our institutions. That it's all a strategy, and that those strategies will adopt themselves to the invariants that we create for ourselves. I think Bitcoin is just the perfect invariant money.